Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to give folks time to come on in and get settled. Okay, so on behalf of myself, Dr. Christopher Clark, Austin Peay State University, the Division of Student Affairs, and the entire university, we are so excited to welcome you to our first kickoff event for our People's Dialogue series. This is going to be a really engaging opportunity. So whether you are watching at home, whether you are in our watch party upstairs, we are really happy that you are a part of this engagement. And hopefully it's informative for you. It definitely is something that we are looking forward to engaging throughout this time. We have a jam-packed hour for you, so I will not delay us any further. But I encourage you throughout this conversation to take notes. If you have questions or comments, whether you are in a watch party and there's a QR code in the room upstairs, scan the QR code and submit those questions or comments. Or if you're watching via webinar, to write down your questions and submit them, or write some comments in the chat. Our panelists, who will be introduced shortly, we'll be able to see those and communicate with you. And it's the hope that throughout this time, you'll be able to learn more about what the People's Dialogue is about and what you can get out of this experience moving forward, okay? So to get us started, it's definitely important for us to set the tone for the dialogue. The first session that we have is called Promoting Civic Engagement, Understanding, and a Shared Commitment. That's our tagline, but we're talking about common ground. And the common ground is setting the foundation for the work, and it's around this idea of free expression and building and bridging differences, okay? So before I get into who I am, because you heard my voice already, a quick overview of the activities that we're going to do. First, we're going to do a people's welcome and overview. There'll be brief remarks from our Austin Peay administrators, who will again introduce themselves shortly. We have some featured guest speakers who are going to be with us from the University of Chicago to talk more about the work that they're doing and share best practices and resources that may be helpful to us as we embark on this series of conversations around very tough topics, but necessary topics for our stakeholders. And then we'll allow you to ask questions that may be on your mind. Some of you submitted them in the chat. And if you wouldn't mind submitting them again, that'd be great for us, so we can ensure we can answer them moving forward. And then as we wrap up, we want to make sure we provide resources that can be helpful to you as you continue to create spaces for you, your students, your communities, your colleagues as well. So this is what we'll be doing throughout this time, and we hope that this is beneficial to you, okay? So again, my name is Chris Clark, formerly Dr. Christopher Clark. I serve as the Assistant Vice President here within the Division of Student Affairs. I oversee the area of community belonging and success. I've been in my role since May 1st. I've been hired for around 17 years. I've previously served as Assistant Dean at the University of Miami School of Law. And I received my doctorate in higher education at the University of Miami School of Education. My research focused on generation leadership and perceptions of inclusive leadership for Gen Z students. This work is a passion for mine, and I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to co-lead this initiative along with Dr. Gilmore, who you'll meet shortly. So this image kind of sets the tone for what I want to talk about before we get into the series. This was an image that I used when the 2020 election came around. So as I mentioned before, I worked in higher ed in 17 years ago, which means I was in higher ed for the 2020 election, the 2016 election. I've been in higher ed for a number of different elections, and every year that there's an election, there's a moment of clarity, of unclarity, and a moment of conflict or dissent that exists mostly on college campuses between various stakeholders, but particularly some of our younger people, because we're understanding and learning what advocacy looks like. We're expressing ourselves, and we're finding a way to use our voice in a way that's meaningful. But we meet different forms of that, and we're learning how to do that in a meaningful way, in a way that does not infringe on our rights that we have. And so this image represents 2020, what was a moment in time where we saw a collective form of expression that either unified our country and our world, but also created a way of expression that could have also separated us in a unique way. So I start here by saying this is one of the ways that reformed my way of understanding how dialogue and discourse was a priority for me in my capacity. Okay. So because of the work of what I did in 2020 to help create spaces on college campuses, I wanted to understand those who were least exposed to some of this discourse, and that was Gen Z. So I dedicated some of my work to understanding inclusive leadership for Gen Z. And this is important because us, as some of the ones who are a little bit older, who've been around various types of dissent and discourse and points of unrest, whether we know or don't know, we've been exposed to it. And some of the newer students, the young people who are coming into adulthood, are learning how to express themselves and advocate for themselves. But how to do that is something that is unique to them. How they learn, how they engage, how they advocate is different. And we have to know that as leaders to be able to support, nurture, and embrace that. So I studied that. The other thing is that as we are in higher ed, we're learning that we get older every year. Our students are, for the most part, traditional age, the same age. There's a gap that exists there. So how do we fill that gap with information so that we can, again, create spaces where our students can express themselves, we can support their ability to express themselves, and we can advocate for that and learn about them in a way that creates, again, a vibrant college campus. So the populations I studied were Gen Z, minoritized Gen Z students, and these are some characteristics of those students. I studied the ways in which they engage, okay? Academic, campus, and even as it relates to their mental health and well-being. And one thing you'll see is that although they were better aware when it comes to their mental health and well-being, they had higher rates of anxiety, self-injury, and depression, and they were underutilizing resources. Sense of belonging, which is the area that I'm over, community belonging, was a huge factor into how they were able to persist, matriculate, and thrive on a college campus. My form of intervention was inclusive leadership, because that is a role that impacts all of us, regardless of our role that we have on campus, whether that's an administrator, faculty, or a student. If done correctly, evidence would suggest that the outcomes are better when it comes to academic performance, retention rates, involvement, self-worth, acceptance, and satisfaction. This framework is a framework that basically is chapter 2 of my dissertation, but also shows for a population, studying them intentionally as we bring them to campuses, but also how we prepare for points of unrest and civil dialogue and discourse is important. To do that, I use a conceptual framework that focused on the human resources and business sector. It was a systematic review of 107 research papers across various sectors to understand inclusive leadership behaviors. This is important and powerful because it understood leadership from various levels, not just from the organizational level, but from the individual level and the team level. That was important because it created multiple points of empowerment for people, not just at the highest point, but at the individual point, right? And as you can see, what I found out from my study and my research of interviewing these students through a mixed method analysis is that these are the most salient elements that Gen Z students at the time found to be helpful when it comes to finding a sense of belonging. Why does this matter, right? When it comes to how we foster uniqueness for our students that are on campus, that are part of this generation, when it comes to how we strengthen belongingness within a team, how we show appreciation, how we support their efforts, and how we invest the outcomes for this population that we are bringing and engaging in these conversations yield outcomes that are better for us. And so as we transition into what this dialogue and this series is about, I want you all to know, somebody who's invested in this, as well as Dr. Clemens and other leaders, this foundation is true and it's there and it's evidence-based. So we can go across various generations and various demographics to say, what is the core of what we're doing and what does it mean for us as it relates to civil dialogue and discourse? So I want you all to know that as somebody who's co-leading this, that's the core of what I'm going to be hoping to uncover from my area as not only a co-lead, but somebody who's over community belonging and success. With that, the People's Dialogue is just what it is. It's designed to engage our entire campus community on meaningful conversations on topics that promote this idea of free expression and dialogue, okay? We want to bring the community together to have environments, inclusive environments where we are respected and our values are shared, okay? And we want to ultimately get to a space where we can have opportunities to explore topics that gets us closer to this mutual understanding and unity. It's important now. We need to model that. Okay. Who are our stakeholders? Who are the appropriate stakeholders to have at the table? As you can see, here are our partners. We are in partnership with mainly APSU-TV. They will be in the future not only broadcasting this, but they will be potentially facilitating this and streaming this on their sites, and hopefully allowing this to be picked up by more regular broadcasted news channels as well. But we want to make sure that this Oh, looks like I just froze. What am I back on now? Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's why we have backup for technology. Sorry about that. I'm back on now. Technology loves to play a nice trick. So what I was saying is the partnerships are important because we want to make sure that we have a well-rounded, robust group of stakeholders that can really make sure that the work that we're doing touches on all parts of the experience. So my institutional culture piece, my student athlete piece, from our student government piece, and then from our faculty piece, which is the Center for Advancement for Faculty Excellence. We want to make sure that our entire campus conversation has stakeholders that really are here to engage us in these conversations on various hard topics that can touch every part of our experience. And we want to engage these conversations intentionally. How do we do these? An evidence-based approach that we've put together really comprises of these components. We want to make sure that when we engage us as a campus community, we want to make sure we're clear on what our standards are. What are our agreements? What do we want to talk about? What do we stand for when we say we enter this space in good faith to really challenge each other, but really be in good faith when we engage? How are we creating dynamics where people can be able to participate? So right now, we have an in-person watch party, but we're also online. My technology went out, but we could be in person as well, right? How are we making sure that the topics we're talking about are relevant and timely? What are we doing to make sure we're elevating the voices of those that need to be elevated so that we're not monopolizing the voices of those who misrepresent or do not have the lived or expertise to be speaking on topics? How can we bring out outside experts or some of our faculty or other leaders that have the level of knowledge to help educate us on what to do? Can we have a form of training but engagement that allows us to learn while actively participating? Are there intentional questions that we can include in these workshops and engagements that allows us to actively think and challenge our thoughts so that we can be better? And then last but not least, there is no good without action. We do not want to leave these spaces with more weight and heaviness and nothing to do about them. So these spaces are designed to give you all of these components, but not leave you with more of a burden without something to do with them. So these will be designed to give you points of resources, action, and next steps that you can apply moving forward, okay? And then finally, the elements that exist within this to allow you to do those, number one, we have to create environments moving forward with this series that gives you the opportunity as community members to lead with vulnerability, to receive vulnerability from us, right? So it's a give and take, okay? We have to create multiple forms of dialogue structures that has a form of education plus open discussion. It can't be just one way. It's not a lecture. It's not a TED Talk. It is a discussion, and we will get to more of those as the dialogue series continues. And then last but not least, we have to be consistent and continuous in how we provide interactive opportunities for involvement. And so we want you all to think about, as we go through this, how you can actively be involved in the work that we do. This is not us This is not for us. This is for each of us to be a part in, and not just for the ones that you see on the screen today. Some of the topics that you see that are listed on the site are here. I won't go through all of them, but these are some of the more salient topics that exist. I saw one of the questions that said, when are we going to have a conversation around climate issues? Love to have it. Let's put something on the calendar, right? And so we want you to propose which categories should be added to this list. Number one. Number two, which events should we prioritize and when? And number three, even though we have events set up that's on that calendar, we want you all to know that we don't monopolize how civil discourse takes place. We have an opportunity for you all to extend the work that we're doing, and we can link that to the work that's happening across the campus, because we know that we aren't the folks that monopolize conversations. We know that great work and great facilitators and great conversations are happening in various colleges, units, offices across this entire campus, and we want to make sure we support that. So we challenge you to challenge us on making sure that our topics, our categories, our events, our speakers actually are effective and appropriate for what we want to accomplish as an institution, and we hope that we can do that effectively. Okay? And then last but not least, before I turn it over to Dr. Clemens to provide some remarks, is, if we do this well, while faced with some of the balance between this idea of respect and this idea of protecting the First Amendment, we want you to feel welcome and heard. We need to uphold our constitutional rights, but we want to be focused on providing a welcome and inclusive community on campus that's collective to create an inclusive environment. We're committed to working diligently to make this place a place where everyone feels valued, heard, supported, and respected. So that's the goal. I'm glad I got a chance to introduce that to you. And with that being said, I would like to pass the floor over to Dr. Clemens, who, again, was one of the leaders that brought this initiative to the campus early on, to provide some remarks on behalf of the Division of Student Affairs. Dr. Clemens, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I'm here, but I'm getting a sign that says you cannot start your video.
Oh, I'll fix that in 1 second. I think, Sarah, you have to make Dr. Clemens a co-host.
Done.
There we go. I think my video is showing now. If it's not, let me know. I believe it is. Can you see me? Somebody give me a thumbs up, because I can't see myself.
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, great. Awesome. I'm really excited about this for a number of reasons. As you all know, that Logan Sykes, our student body president, and I shared a letter on last week, is that centered around the thought that we all have differences in thought and expression, in perspective and inquiry, and how we engage society. But how we engage dialogue and discourse, even in difference, matters as a community. We both found commonality in our thought that Austin Peay is a community of courage and one of inspiration, where perspectives, regardless of where they may come from and the experiences that may cultivate those perspectives, are shared, respected, and that free expression and civil dialogue is promoted and supported, and everyone is committed to a community that fosters that success. And so this People's Dialogue is a series of conversations, as you know, and activities, as Dr. Clark explained, to engage our entire Austin Peay community, students, faculty, and staff, in what we hope to be very impactful and meaningful interactions that not only highlight the importance of civil dialogue, but equip us, educate us, and give us the knowledge to be able to take that and place it into practice in commonality and in difference. So I'm really grateful that we're able to engage in the first of these conversations. And we're really excited about our guests from the University of Chicago and all the work that we will engage in over the course of this academic year to ensure that we have a community that where we share differences, we also share commonalities, where we support free expression, we also support civil dialogue and civil discourse. So thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to address everyone, and we really hope that you enjoy this session, and we ask that you continue to participate in the sessions to come.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clemens, for your vision and your support on this initiative. All right, so without further ado, I would love to pass it now to Dr. Lindsay Gilmore, our Associate Vice President for Campus Engagement, to provide some remarks. Dr. Gilmore is also a co-lead on this initiative and my former colleague in student affairs. So Dr. Gilmore, it's all yours. I think your audio's off, Dr. Gilmore.
Can you hear me now? Is my audio working now?
Yes, it's working now.
Thank you. Once again, technology, lovely.
Oh yeah, we love it.
Thanks, Dr. Clark, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to launch this initiative. It's such an impactful practice, and one which I think a lot of folks sometimes forget the importance of it. So really quickly, a little bit about me. So I am the Associate Vice President for Campus Engagement here at Austin Peay. I have 4 areas within my portfolio, just really quickly so that folks kind of know what's within that and how this is important to the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. So I have our Housing and Residence Life team, so all of our students that live on campus and all the eating establishments on campus. I have Community Care and Standards, so our Student Code of Conduct, ensuring our students that are experiencing any sort of barrier to their success here at Austin Peay. Our care team, I co-chair our care team, so our behavioral threat assessment intervention team. Also our community engagement and sustainability, so volunteering within the community, how we engage with the greater Clarksville, Nashville, and beyond community, and how we practice sustainability efforts here at the institution as well. And then our student life and engagement, so all of our student orgs, our leadership opportunities and initiatives, Greek life, all those sorts of things. So all of those things make the campus experience for our students here. I also interact with our faculty and staff heavily as well. And so I think it's important to know that as I talk about the importance of finding common ground and of bridging differences and how I'm able to support that here at Austin Peay and how I've done it in the past. So Chris, if you'll go to the next slide for me. So let me share a little bit about my background and kind of what I've done in regard to some of this work. So I've been in higher ed, much like Dr. Clark, for about 17, 18 years. And it has been my mission to intentionally create spaces and opportunities where we as a campus community can courageously tackle these difficult conversations. I think often we like to skirt away or around difficult conversations as humans, right? Because we're uncomfortable sometimes with those things. But when we do that, we lose the power of our voice, right? We lose the power of the collective voices of those within our community. And I think that it is imperative that we remember and recognize the power of our voices, and that we do everything that we can to ensure that we create spaces with which voices can be heard. Authenticity is really important. And so when we're having these difficult conversations and trying to find that common ground, authentically showing up as to who I am as a practitioner, as who I am as, Lindsay, right? So making sure that I do show up authentically and focus on building those relationships with students and my colleagues. Because I've found that when we do have difficult conversations, having a foundational relationship can help guide that conversation sometimes more impactfully, depending on what we're talking about, and also potentially push us to some actionable items as well. The other thing that has been important to me and that I've learned during my time is the importance of listening, especially as a college administrator. A lot of times, we want to say, well, this is what we've done, right? This is what we're doing, instead of just sitting and listening. And so in my time as a practitioner, I have been able to support student protests at every institution that I've been a part of. And part of that is listening, right? Part of that is listening to our students and what they're telling us and what they're telling us that they need and providing support. So when our students at my last institution wanted to protest within the greater community that that institution was located in, it was, how can I help support you in protesting safely, right? Let's make sure you have water. It was during the pandemic, so let's make sure that you all have masks if that's what you need. Let's make sure that we have a plan of action in case the protests were to go away with which you don't feel comfortable with, right? So listening to our students and providing that support. From listening to our students and showing up authentically, being able to develop campus policies and protocols. So when an incident happened on campus, developing a bias response protocol for the department that I worked in, because that didn't exist. And the students were talking about how they didn't feel supported in that. So the common ground that we were able to come to was, let's develop this and let's get your feedback in that before we actually apply it and put it into practice. And then I've been on college campuses during several elections, and it's been important for the student leaders that I've worked with to have some sort of post-election civil discourse guide that helps them kind of find common ground with their peers at the same time, because some of those conversations can be very difficult. And so how do I, as a college administrator, help our student leaders and our students also find common ground with their peers as well? Next slide, Dr. Clark. Perfect. So I want to talk about the importance of this work a little bit more in detail than what I just shared a moment ago. There is definitely a skill set development that comes with learning how to have difficult conversations and civil discourse. We like to live behind our phones, right? And behind our computers. And so a lot of times this discourse happens online, or it can happen in person. And so how are we developing the next generation of leaders to have that skill set to have these difficult conversations? So if we're not doing that here within academia and higher education, our community members may not be experiencing that in any other location. So I think it's really, really important as members of higher education that we are recognizing the skill set that we're also developing with ourselves and also of our students when we engage in these conversations, when we support each other in this work, whatever that might be. I also want to talk very briefly about the chilling effect that can happen on college campuses and communities and censorship. It is so important that we do neither of these as an institution. We have a lot of policies and protocols around First Amendment rights, right? But it can happen where areas, communities, organizations, whatever it might be, can unintentionally create an environment where folks don't feel comfortable sharing their viewpoints and beliefs on things. And so it's really important through the work that I do and this initiative in and of itself that we don't create a chilling effect on our college campus. And then lastly is our institutional expectations, which I kind of just touched on briefly, making sure students know where our free speech zones are, making sure that folks are aware of our policies and protocols and that folks can find that information as easily and readily as possible. And that is really important because I want to make sure that folks understand what the expectations are of our community here at Austin Peay. Next slide, please. So kind of going along that same vein, these are just some screenshots of the People's Dialogue website. You should have also received that in your email as well as we were advertising this initiative. But I want to touch really briefly on the helpful resources portion of that page because I think that there's some really great information, some hidden gems in there. So if you click that and then looking at our code of conduct, our faculty handbook, and then our free speech zones. On our website, we have pictures of where our free speech zones are located, information all around that, and other policies and protocols. So I think that's really important. But I would also be remiss to mention that this is hard work, right? Engaging in difficult conversations is hard. And so I think it's imperative that we talk about how individuals are supported throughout that, through our counseling office and through the Top Campus initiative that we have with our counseling office as well. And then we do have varying modalities to report various concerns. And so there's 3 or 4 different reporting mechanisms that's also on our website, so that if anyone feels like any of their rights are infringed upon, or there's any bias or discrimination, or concerns about a member of our community, folks can go online and do that as well, which is critical as we're engaging in these conversations. And then the next slide talks a little bit for me about kind of my charge to you all here as you've been here. So kind of the so what, now what? I had a mentor that would say that to me all the time when I would talk to her about difficult things. She'd be like, okay, so what, now what? So I just really encourage, and I'm asking everyone that's participating in this today to engage in courageous dialogue, where we have differing opinions from each other. I think it's important that we're also knowledgeable and informed, so knowledgeable about our campus protocols, policies, and practices, and that we're informed about what's going on in the world around us and how that might impact our community here at Austin Peay and Clarksville. I think it's also important that we role model faculty and staff, student leaders, students in general, that we role model, right? We role model what this looks like for those around us. And then attending ongoing events, as Dr. Clemens and Dr. Clark have both mentioned, we're going to have monthly dialogues and potentially some other events as well. So I just encourage and ask that you all continue not only the conversation, but also attending the events that the institution will have available as well. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Clark to continue the presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilmore. We really appreciate the words that you are providing and also your leadership on this front. And so without further ado, I think, one of the pieces of information and the individuals that I'm happy to really introduce throughout this time, dear friend, colleague, and a person who has made himself available to really impart wisdom on us today is Professor Tom Ginsberg, who happens to serve as a faculty director, but he's also a professor of law at the University of Chicago in the law school, but he's also the faculty director of the University of Chicago's Forum of the Free Inquiry Expression. I'm not going to do it justice, nor am I going to attempt to do justice about explaining it, but I'm also, I want him to be able to share with us some of the work that he has done, and also have us in a position where we can talk more about the areas that we can improve or prepare for expression. And I would love for you, if you're so willing to do so, share with us some of the historical context of free expression and academic freedom and the origins, because I don't know everyone is aware, and then how you would love to tie it to some of the other pieces. But so grateful for you, and it's good to see you, and thanks for being here with us. So without further ado, Dr. Tom Ginsberg.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks to everyone for paying attention here today. If indeed you are. Chris and I are old friends and colleagues, so when he called up, I was happy to oblige, and I wish I could be there in person, of course, but this is the next best thing. And so I'm a scholar of constitutional democracy all over the world, and in doing that work, I have come to realize that universities are really important places for democracy. Like, we are the places where we generate information and facts. Really, we create knowledge that then can be used by the parties as they fight it out for who's going to have power. Obviously, we have a role in training young people as citizens and such. And we have an internal, the way we do this, of course, is internal, robust free expression. And we're at a moment in the United States and in many other countries where academic freedom is under some threat. And so that's what led me to get involved in my president asked me to start this thing called the Forum on Free Inquiry and Expression, which we launched about a year ago. We just got this huge, wonderful endowment gift. So we're going to be here for a while. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But I thought what I would do is first talk about free expression. And actually, if you could, Chris, if you could bring up that slide of the connection between Chicago and Tennessee. Here, let's see. Let me allow. So one reason I really feel a bond here is the Forum on Free Expression here at the University of Chicago. We're located in the south side of Chicago, and we are located about a mile away from the graveyard of a woman named Ida B. Wells. And I don't know if many of you know her history, but Ida B. Wells was from Tennessee. She had a newspaper in Memphis called The Free Speech. And this was in the 19th century, really before free speech law had really developed. Free speech law is a creature of the 1920s. But before then, you had abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, who relied on free speech to make the claim that they should be allowed to make the arguments that they did make. And then Ida B. Wells had a magazine called The Freedom of Speech, and she was, of course, very focused on lynching. And so, unfortunately, she was driven out of Memphis. A mob came and destroyed her newspaper. She moved up here to the south side of Chicago, and she's buried about a mile from here. And to me, she's like a foundational person for thinking about the deployment of scientific knowledge in the interests of social reform, as well as an advocate of free speech. So what she did in her anti-lynching activism, she went and she gathered data and used that data to make a case for fighting the abomination of lynching, and raised a lot of awareness of it with knowledge, which is the kind of thing what we do in universities. So she's sort of our patron saint. Universities in general, let me talk a little bit about free speech in general, and then why it's important in universities. So free speech in general. First of all, sometimes when I talk to people, they say, free speech, that's, so passé. That's, Elon Musk and Twitter or something like that, which of course is part of free speech. But to me, that's missing the forest for the trees, because freedom of expression is actually an international human right. It's something that makes us human. For those of you who are ever, writers or poets or, artists or musicians or anything, know that expressing yourself is a deeply human thing, and something when your voice is taken away, you feel disempowered. And so it's something that makes us human, and something that's also super necessary in democracy. Without question, you can't have a democracy unless you have the freedom to criticize your government. Now, in an academic context, I think it has a slightly different kind of framing. And here I rely on the idea that the purpose of academia ultimately is inquiry. You see, our forum is called the Forum on Free Inquiry and Expression. And that's because, of course, there's free speech. We're all in America. We have very broad free speech rights. But we do limit free speech in the university all the time. I can't get up in my class and start teaching. I'm a law professor. I can't start teaching about nuclear physics for a lot of reasons. I don't know anything about it. But if I were to do so, I would be violating my duties, my contractual duties. I could be fired. If you're in my class, you can't just get up and start screaming about something to interrupt the class. Like, there's all kinds of limits that we have in order to make, and those limits are what make the conversation possible, the conversation about ideas, the norms and the rules that structure speech in a university allow us to channel our energies towards the most important thing, which is inquiry. And that means that we might have more, we do have more limits on speech in the university, but there are certain things where we might need even broader critique than would be allowed within ordinary society, or than would be seen as advisable. And that's because the way that ideas get developed is, in my view, through sharp contestation. If I put forward a paper, if I go give a paper to my colleagues, I want them to criticize me as hard as they can. They're doing me a favor when they criticize my paper, because they're going to make it better. And it's almost like the fear of going in front of them will actually make me have my first draft hopefully be pretty good. But I'm always learning things from my colleagues because they're giving me the gift of critiquing my ideas. We have to remember, of course, that the way you do that matters a lot. Our slogan is tough on ideas and kind to people. That is, if you're attacking someone's ideas, you should be as tough as you can. Don't pull punches because you want to be, because you think it'll, you don't want to embarrass someone. But you have to do it in the nicest way. And so that's kind of a goal for humane discussion inside the university. Now, we I think it's important. The University of Chicago in particular is a good place for this kind of work. We were founded in 1890, and that's really important, actually. Like when you were founded makes a big difference. The peer institutions, you might think of like Harvard and Yale, they were founded, in the 17th century when ideas about free inquiry were not very popular. I mean, they were kind of like founded in some sense to create preachers, like divinity was a major subject. And there wasn't the kind of openness to new ideas that really in the United States explodes at the end of the 19th century. It's really the end of the 19th century. It's called the so-called progressive era. The progressives really believed in technically proper ways to do things. So one of their slogans was, there's no Democrat or Republican way to pave a street. You just need to know how to pave streets. And that kind of deployment of expert knowledge in a neutral way that didn't serve either party was celebrated at the time. And they really believed in experts. They really believed in democracy. And they really believed in knowledge institutions like academic freedom. So we happened to be founded then, and that was really good, really lucky for us, because very early on in the university's history, there was some donor pressure on some issue. I think there was a kind of communist professor, proto-communist professor, and the university president responded and got the faculty to agree that we would adopt as our fundamental principle freedom of speech forever. The fact that this guy had ideas that offended people was not to be used to restrict him. And also another idea, this is, we probably won't get into, but that our university doesn't take positions on issues of the day. And so this last year, actually, that was very helpful because, as you may know, we've had all kinds of pressure in universities. It tends to be the more elite ones, but demanding that university presidents speak out about one issue or the other, speak out in favor, to express sympathy with the hostage victims in Israel, speak out to criticize the Israeli response in Gaza, divest your funds, all of those kind of speech acts. And our university just has a policy and has for 120 years, and we just don't do that. We just don't do it. It's off the table. And the reason is that's designed to facilitate an intense inquiry by the members of the university community. A university community is a plural community. We have people from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different knowledge positions, and that makes us better. In order to get inquiry, you need diversity of perspective and every other kind of social diversity, as well as free expression. And if you put those two things together, diversity and free expression, then you can get somewhere on tough problems. And so we've always stood for this at the University of Chicago. And this forum, which I'll describe in just a minute, is sort of this generation's contribution to that ongoing history. Throughout the 20th century, when other universities were firing people for being communists or criticizing the war, we never did that. And I think that's really, I feel lucky to be at such a place, and I hope that we're the place to kind of lead in this particular moment. I want to describe a little bit of our particular moment. Higher education's in some trouble in society. This country is very, very polarized, as I'm sure I don't have to tell you. This is going to be one of the closest elections in a long, long time. And that means there's going to be hard feelings by roughly 50% of the people in the country. And so it's important to sort of think in advance how we're going to channel that energy on a campus and other places. Because democracy depends on the losers being willing to, say, I lost that one, but I can fight another day. We'll go come up with some new policies or new candidates and we'll fight again. But we're at a moment where that mood is not very, that sense that I'm going to live to fight another day is not very strong in the country. We have people who are really, see every election as kind of an existential threat. Oh my God, if this side wins, we're going to become Venezuela. Or if this side wins, we're going to become a fascist dictatorship. And the fact is, neither of those things is actually remotely true. But the discourse around the election is so intense and just indicates a society where people are really, really divided. I should say as an aside that the people of the United States are not as divided as our politicians. And there's lots of reasons for that. But the people of the United States actually agree on lots and lots of issues, like on abortion and gun control, these like hot button issues. Actually, the average American it doesn't matter what party they are, shares a lot of views. And that's actually gives me some hope, because even though the politicians have an incentive to mobilize sort of, fear and such, if we could talk to each other, I think we'd make big advances as a country. And it's got to come in some sense from the society. And universities, of course, are ground zero for that. We're the ones who should be leading in showing people how to talk across difference, including political difference and every other kind. So I think it's really important that we get this right. But we really haven't that much. I mean, I don't know about Austin Peay, but I think at elite universities, which I follow, I don't think we've done as good a job as I'd like to see. There's been a lot of division, obviously. There's a sense by important constituencies in society that we're not doing as good a job as we can about dialogue across difference. There's a sense on one side of the political aisle, and we saw this in the hearings last year, that university presidents are just creating, or Democrat creating machine or something like that, which of course is not right. But that makes us very vulnerable to attacks, and we're all sensitive to funding and pressures from state legislatures and stuff. And so it's a delicate moment. And for that reason, I really think we have a duty to get it right. So now I'll talk a little bit about the forum, and you don't have to put the slide up, Chris, I'll just talk it through. But the Forum on Free Inquiry Expression, well, what do we do? So we're founded, we have a sort of three-part mission. We want to increase the understanding of free expression, the practice of free expression, and then advancing free expression. So understanding free expression is like is a research topic, right? It's how and I think it involves the entire university. There's all kinds of places where you have free expression challenges. I just giving a talk in the medical school today. They have their particular context. It involves research on the neuroscience of expression, on the history, and how political conflict can be channeled through effective dialogue. Those kind of questions that you all were talking about in the that Professor Gilmore was talking about. That kind of thing is a research project. So we want to fund and support that kind of research. Practicing free expression, this is something where I think we all need practice. We can all get better. It's like a muscle, exercising how to have a dialogue with someone with whom you might disagree. There's research on it, and it shows that people actually like it more than they think they would. And this is important for the polarization point. Like if you talk to someone from the other side, you might go in thinking, oh my God, this person is like, stands with this politician I think is the devil incarnate. But people actually end up enjoying those conversations and finding points of agreement and bracketing points of disagreement. We don't have to agree on everything, but at least we can identify where we agree, where we disagree as just an analytic matter. I think that's a very helpful exercise. So we really want to increase the ability of our students to do this. And there's lots of ways one can do that. So our mission is internal to the University of Chicago there. But then the other thing that we really want to do is advance free expression in the country, because it really does require, I think, recommitting universities to their core mission. And we have all kinds of things. We have summer programs and other things where we're bringing people in to talk about these issues, to learn about these issues, to workshop them. Not because we have all the right answers, for sure. These are really tough problems out there. But if we can talk about them together and say, well, this one worked, this one didn't, and do it in a humble way of trying to learn more about how to do better, I think that's a very healthy thing. Now, I want to say one thing about the general context of universities. If, free expression and free speech is something like it stands for a bunch of different practices. And in a university context, as I said before, it doesn't mean that anyone can say anything they want all the time. That's not right. It does mean that, so it's more than the absence of constraint. In law, free speech means that the government cannot restrict you. They can have all kinds, you can have restrictions on the time, place, and manner of speech, but they can't pick and say, oh, we're going to allow a Palestine encampment, but we're not going to allow a anti-abortion encampment or something like that. They have to treat all speakers the same. And so that's the absence of constraint, and that's fine. I think we all understand as Americans that general set of rules. But I think in a university, we have to do more than that. That is, we can't just say it's the absence of constraint. We have to actively build up opportunities for every single student who walks in the door. And to get practice at at speaking and to provide context in which they can share their ideas and opinions and maybe even change their mind. And that requires us, the faculty, to model that. But it also provides, requires really thinking through what is the experience of a student coming in and thinking about, pluralism and diversity in all its forms. In that regard, obviously, we live in a socially stratified society, a racially stratified society. We have to take all those things into account. But we also have to grapple with the fact that some people are just, for example, shy, and we owe a special duty to people who are shy to help them find the ability to express themselves, because again, the social psychology research shows that people really do enjoy it more than they think they would when they're in conversation with others. So that requires, again, active construction. So that's another thing that the forum is going to do. We also orient everyone who walks in the door on free expression issues, academic freedom. Those of, if you talk to your professors, and maybe there's some watching, I'm sure none of you, no faculty members ever had an exposure to what academic freedom is. It's not like we train people in this when you walk in the door, but it would be important to do that, to know what I can do, what I can't. I think what Professor Gilmore was saying about telling students what you can do in protest and what you can't. Protest is part of democracy, but in our view, you can't occupy a building or tear down the other side's speech. Some other people's speech. You have to respect other people's rights, etc. So, training people in how to do this, I think, is really important, and I think that applies to every student, every new faculty member, because they're not going to get anywhere else. And actually, I'm trying to do some things with staff, because staff are very important, like the people who are, have student contact in dorms or residence halls or something like that. Everyone should be kind of on board and rowing in the same direction if we really want our universities to be serving the students and to really giving them skills that, frankly, our entire democracy depends on. Like, if we can't do this in universities, well, then we really can't do it. Then the country is really doomed. So that's kind of the mission that we're on. And with that, I obviously could talk about all kinds of things. I know I'm already, I think, a little over my time, but I'd love to hear questions and comments and reactions, because that's also a great way to continue the dialogue. I'll close with one thing, which is, if you go back to the ancient Greeks or the Confucian Analects, the classical thinkers in those traditions, and the Indian tradition as well, those things come down to us as dialogues, as conversations. The teacher and the student are in conversation, and through that process, it's actually how thinking occurs. That's what I've found. Is like, I'll write my paper, but I really make advances when I sit down with a colleague and talk it through. And so I think it's really an essential practice, and that we all need to get up to speed and do it as much as we can. All right, so I know for questions, I see one that's come through about bipartisan political process. So I'll read the question, then I'll talk about it. What role does the bipartisan political process play in creating the dichotomous nature of conflict and disagreement in the United States? So that's a great question. And so this is you might say, well, how could it be that politicians who are supposed to represent the people could be more divided than the people? And remember that politicians are trying to win the election, which in our country increasingly means not appealing to the voters in the middle, but at getting your base so riled up that they show up to vote. There's a famous political scientist, E. Schaffsnyder, who said, politics is the mobilization of bias. The mobilization of bias. Think about that. Trying to get you to dislike the other side so much that you'll undertake the costly action of getting up on election day and going out and voting for the lesser of two evils sometimes. So I think that it is politicians, but I blame not them as much as some features of our constitutional order, honestly. The reason the politicians are more divided than the people has to do with the way that districts are drawn, electoral districts are drawn in our country. And in some states, you have, nonpartisan electoral commissions that draw the districts. I think there's about 20 of those now. But in many others, the process is undertaken by the state legislature. And that's because of the Constitution. James Madison, probably the dumbest decision he made in the Constitution was to say that to give the process of running elections to state legislatures. And he did that because he didn't think there would be political parties. He thought it was really mistaken, but he thought there would be no factions in his perfectly running constitutional system. So instead, what he did is he gave the process of drawing the boundaries to the people who have benefit from those boundaries. This is a proverbial case of the fox guarding the chicken coop. And what they have done is draw what you've heard the word gerrymandered districts. And the gerrymander is really a case where instead of the voters choosing their representatives, the representatives are choosing their voters because they draw the boundaries in a way which will maximize their chance of winning. And if that's the case, then those representatives do not care about moving to the center. They want to be very, very partisan. And so there's kind of a pressure in Congress to outbid to get sort of wackier and wackier. And that's a big problem. So the bipartisan process is a big part of the problem. There are other countries, though, that are parliamentary systems that use proportional representation. And they've also had some polarization. So if it was up to me, I would fix this problem by having more balanced electoral districts that were more competitive. I think that would be better for our politics and might lower the temperature. It's also, of course, a big role of the media. And a follow-up question, thank you, anonymous attendee. If we had another major political party, would we have less division? So this gets to the question of proportional representation. Or, and what if we were to have a different kind of political system? And of course, we've had third parties run several times in my lifetime. Ross Perot won 19% of the vote in 1992. It's a big number. He didn't get any electoral college votes. And of course, Ralph Nader, whose candidacy probably gave the election to George W. Bush with massive consequences for world history. And so, yeah, from time to time, we do have these third parties and they run. And they can be consequential. But why don't they win? And this, again, has to do with the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College, we all know, seems crazy if you think about it from the point of view of having a kind of majority rule. We have had, I guess, twice in your lifetimes, presidents win election who didn't win the majority vote, which is people in other countries think is absolutely crazy. So the Electoral College has got a lot to do with this. It pushes the parties towards trying to, pushes towards a two-party system. Because Ross Perot, although he had a huge share, he didn't win enough to win any single state. And so that's a big part of the problem. It's very hard to get to a viable third-party system. Now, it's true that countries that do have kind of three-party systems, I think Germany would fit that, four-party systems, they have stable coalitions, and they do reflect they give better representation, better sort of political, better representation of the range of political views in the society. But they also can create situations where you have a lot of very, very minor parties. And then there's a lack of accountability because you have coalition governments that come together in which they don't represent anybody. That's actually the situation right now in Israel, which is one reason that Netanyahu is really going hard on war, is because he knows when the war's over, he's going to probably lose office. But also, he's in coalition. He needs the support of some really crazy, frankly, racist parties. And so that very small parties with fringe views can have too much influence in that system. So I don't know that there's a better way to do it, but I do think there are some technically better ways that we could get in the United States that would reduce the polarization. I mentioned one, nonpartisan election commissions. The other one that a lot of political scientists talk about is ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting, where you go into the ballot box and you, instead of just saying, your number one choice, you say your number 1, 2, and 3 choices down the list. And the reason that's good is because in order to win those kind of things, like if I'm a candidate, I know I want to get many people to say number one, but I also want to get the other party people to list me as number two. I want to seem more reasonable to them than you know, some fringe candidate. And so that kind of pushes things toward the center. And Maine has that, Alaska. That turns out to be a great system that's within our capability of adopting. So I think there are some solutions to that problem. Okay, and wow, this is such a great question. Thank you. A piece of advice you would share with students on approaching civil dialogue in their first presidential election. Wow, that's a great question. I guess the first thing is, let me say that this is since 1960, excuse me, our 16th election since then. In every preceding election, one candidate or the other has won a majority of the vote. Excuse me. I said that wrong. In every previous election, there's been one point in the campaign where one candidate has had a lead of 5 percentage points in public opinion polls over the other one, okay? So there's always been kind of a clear leader. This one, that's not the case. It's a razor close election, very, very sharply divided country. So I think a first piece of advice is, remember, you might lose. And if you lose, the best thing you can do is go to someone on the winning side and shake hands and talk about it, and remember that your side can come back and win. That is, these like micro level connections are very, very important. So I think keep open to the other side. Remember, you might lose, but also remember to go out and vote. And students make a huge difference here. And it's so fantastic, you know, to have your campus be thinking about these issues now. I'm very excited to be part of that. Now I realize I've probably gone on for too long, so I think I should probably. I'm okay. Have I not?
No. I'm actually, and I'm happy that the folks are writing questions in the chat, because that means that they're engaged. I'm also just being fair to the folks that submitted some of the pre-submitted questions. So I wanted to put some of those.
Okay. These are pre-submitted questions.
So these are some of this is the consensus of some of the folks that when they registered, they submitted some questions as well. And so, you know, these aren't ones that you have to tackle on your own. I welcome Dr. Gilmore to turn their camera on and myself. But these are some other ones as well. So yeah, let's do them.
I'd like to say something about each of these. So the first one, we just had an issue where a professor was fired. And actually there's two professors, one kind of on the right and one on the left. There's a law professor named Amy Wax at Penn, who's a private racist. That is, she has said things outside the classroom that disparage Asian Americans and I think African Americans. And so she goes on to like Tucker Carlson and says these things. Now, should she be fired for that? The traditional answer in the United States is no, that academic freedom extends to your extramural communication. If she says something like that in the classroom, that's a different story, because now you're interfering with your students' ability to learn. You're being an incompetent professor and such. And so, if you are taking a class from someone and they have a private view that you don't like, even if it's on Twitter and they're getting a lot of attention for it, the best thing to do is to ignore it. But the faculty, of course, has a duty to separate their political views from their classroom experience. I teach international law, I teach human rights, I teach some controversial stuff. And I sometimes do have to express my own opinion. I always say, okay, now this is going to be my opinion. I'm moving away from what the law is, but this is my view or my interpretation. So try to separate that. But clearly, it's a professional misconduct to treat the classroom as a place you can expound on your particular ideology, I think. It's great that the safety question and the unwanted and unwelcome question, and it's to some degree related to respect and inclusivity. So I want to say something maybe a little controversial. I think probably every single person on the university campus, every single one, including the faculty members, has at some time in their life felt unwanted and unwelcomed, or felt like they were not in the center of things. They felt on the edge. And I think that's kind of a natural human feeling, honestly. And actually, we'd start, well, maybe if we talked about it more, because then you'd realize, like, I'm not alone in feeling like I'm not here, or I'm not seen, or my voice isn't important. And of course, a good professor and a good university will draw out of everyone, all the students, the ability to feel included. in the classroom conversations in the university space. So I think it's, you know, it's a job of universities to try to do it, but it's a hard job. It's not easy because it's a human thing to feel like you're not at the center. And you know, a lot of people, including myself, you know, parents didn't go to school, you know, kind of didn't really know how the system worked. And that's where mentorship can be really helpful. And I think the other thing I'd say is reach out to faculty, reach out to people like Dr. Clark here and others, because they are there to try to help you and to communicate that feeling. So I think it's a great question. I really appreciate that someone asked that question. And then the freedom of expression with the need for respect and inclusivity. Great question. Because I sometimes get the idea like, and this is where I think the idea that freedom of speech is Elon Musk or something, like it is just yelling people at each other, insulting them, like Twitter. And that's a realm of freedom of speech. That's not our realm. We, of course, need what the job of the university is to channel people's very passionate views into rational kind of discussion. And obviously not to, you know, to any comments that disparage people and things like this have to be discouraged. And we're also subject to something called Title VI, which means you can actually violate the law if you create a hostile learning environment for certain kinds of people. So I think ideally, as I said before, inclusivity is absolutely a core value of universities. You can't make progress on ideas unless everyone, every single person, feels included and feels ready to contribute their ideas to the conversation. That's absolutely essential. But, you know, occasionally we do have professors like the one I mentioned who say things even privately that make it hard to feel included. It'd be hard to take a class from that person who was the racist. And so what that university did, rightly, is take her out of any class, any required classes for sure. And I'm not sure what else they've done. Now they're trying to fire her. That's going to be a problem. But you know, it's up to the university to try to make sure that people live up to these values. So yeah, I think these things, I wouldn't treat them as a balance. I would treat them ideally as going together. Because we can't make progress unless everyone's included and everyone feels like they can articulate. Another thing I'll just say about here, ideas are the only thing for which there's no scarcity. There's no limit to the number of ideas we can produce if you and I are in conversation with each other. And that's really a powerful thing. That's the ideal thing of well-functioning university, is producing tons of interesting and powerful ideas, precisely because there's no limit on it. And the more conversation, the more ideas. So that's how I think these things are sort of fit together. I think I got those, except for how can I best show that I care about others' differences? This is not, you know, I don't know that I have much to say about it, except that my own philosophy is to treat everybody, you know, as an end, not as a means to anything. And everyone's an opportunity to have a conversation and to learn. And, you know, there's a little grace we have to give to people when they say things that, you know, that might hurt. But it's, and, you know, but it's also important you do people a service. If someone says something that hurts your feelings, or, you know, is a microaggression or something, you actually do the person a service if you can, in the gentle way, explain that to them. That's very delicate and very hard. And this is where the folks out here on the call have more skill or more experience in talking about how to do that. But
Tom, you addressed that so very well too, and you don't do yourself justice how you are well equipped to answer that question. And since you are the host, what you could do is if you made me the host, and I can turn my camera on and I can answer that question. And I love this about just what you're sharing and even the time you're spending to go through these tough questions, because again, if you're paying attention to what we're demonstrating, is that, as you can see, he is addressing every question, hard, difficult, he's challenging it. But this is what we want to create, a space where we can do in good faith, courageously, professionally, with care and authentically. And I think that is what we're trying to create, as far as a space where we can really build a community. And I'm grateful for the questions that you were asking. I'm grateful for the interest that you have in wanting to know more about how to navigate some of the experiences in and outside of the classroom and even learn, because I think it matters for these spaces. And so, the question, the response I have about the community and how to best show I care about differences, others' differences, is one I'll just share in the later series that we come up around talking across difference. One of the methods that I've learned, and I think Stanford and some other folks have worked on this, is the LAR method. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Tom. Listen first, you affirm, you respond, you add information, and then you add another response on top of that. So the idea is you listen to understand, you kind of ask information, then you respond with a inquiry, then you affirm the statement so that you can understand the intent versus the impact. What it does is it slows your mind down to immediately, unconsciously react to whatever the difference is in a unconscious way that may be perceived as defensive, may create a barrier, and it allows folks to, in a way that's courageous, remove a barrier by being able to educate and understand and create ways for learning. And then on top of that, there's a sense of responsibility that I think we all have when it comes to our learning. We are at institutes of higher learning. You all are here on a 4:30 in the middle of a week because there's something about what you feel you can learn from this space that is valuable to you. And with that comes a sense of responsibility and ownership. And whatever light bulb goes off in this space, how do you go and you look behind Tom's background and you see the 40 million books he has back there? They're not just decoration. There's things in there that are valuable to his learning and expertise. And so we are scholars, we are lifelong learners. And how much of that can we use to our advantage as we continue to have enlightening moments of differences? And how do we handle people with care because of things that may be new, hard for us to hear, and maybe different from our upbringing, socialization, lived experiences, and our belief systems. And that's okay, right? And so I think what you described in your response is spot on, but I think that's what we need to find a way to engage in, is how can we still converse and create spaces where we can learn and engage across differences without it being so detrimental that we reach a point of no return. Because I think that's the part where we have seen that modeled in a way that's not healthy for dissent. So that is my response. And I don't know if you or Dr. Gilmore would like to add anything else to that statement before we wrap up, because I know we're close to time.
The only thing I want to add is the piece about the question around safety and feeling safe. And so I think it's important, as I talked about earlier, the different modalities with which we have to report any concerns that the campus community has. So making sure that folks are aware of those reporting mechanisms, and that the student affairs team and other folks check those. And we'll meet with individuals. We've got the divisive concepts reporting form, if it's something that happened in the classroom, different things along those lines. So just kind of speaking broadly, just wanted to remind folks, because safety is really, really important. And so just want to make sure that folks are aware. I echo everything else that everyone has said, but just that piece right there, I just want to make sure folks are aware of that. So.
And in closing, the great thing about this is that as we continue to build this, and thank you, Tom, for setting this up for us, your questions that you've asked today, that you've put in your registration that come up, this is a repository of things that we're going to continue to track, that goes into our FAQs, that inform the topics that we have for conversations to come. So this is not lost. This is not surface level. This is not checkbox. We can do safer things that are checkbox things, and we don't do that. And Tom knows, because they are in that space all the time. So every bit of information and questions you share will be answered, and we will create spaces on the site and in other ways that can continue to understand these challenges as we move forward together, which is important. So, all right. So as we get closer to time, let's move on to the last side. And Tom, if you will be so gracious enough, we'd like to move from this point now to wrap up to resources. And as we talk about resources, we have 2 resources and reminders internal when it comes to APSU. But I mean, what you're doing and the amazing work that you're doing, and now the investment in infrastructure you have may allow for you to do more work. Can you talk a little more about opportunities that may exist within your space for some of our faculty, staff, and community stakeholders to maybe be involved in the future? And then we'll wrap up.
Well, the one thing I'd say is, we have a lot of internal things that we're doing, and we're trying to generate resources. There's a book that's just been published today, this week, that I co-edited called The Chicago Canon on Free Inquiry and Expression. And that consists of a lot of like the classic statements of policy committees, but also speeches going back to the founding of the university. Is really cool. I enjoyed doing it because it was like I just learned a lot about the challenges. Like, we think we're in challenging times. There have been really challenging times in the last 120, 30 years. And we did come through. And so I think we can do that again. So that's a general resource. The other thing is that we're going to have, we have a summer institute for administrators and for faculty, Academic Freedom Institute. Stay tuned. We're going to announce that's going to be expanded next summer. Love to have some of you up to wrestle with these issues and how you grapple with them. And again, it's not like we're trying to impose right answers. We struggle with the complex scenarios that arise. But if we talk to each other while we're struggling, then we're going to come up with our own way of doing it that advances everyone. So that's really what we've got.
Thank you so much, Tom. And both of those opportunities, and even the book, we'll make sure we put that in the resources. But being in a community and partnership and learning how to tackle this is a benefit to everyone. So thank you so much for sharing that. And anything else, we would love to be in partnership there. Dr. Gilmore, would you like to talk a little more about the zones, and then maybe the calendar before we wrap up?
Sure thing, absolutely. So on the People's Dialogue website, we have a map and actual pictures of where our free speech zones are, just for quick reference. The MUC, so the plaza away from the newly renovated food hall, so closest to the UC, that is one area. And then our Green Man statue, as we like to so affectionately call that area, that is also another area. To reserve that, work with our staff at the UC, and so that contact information is on there as well as on the website. And then on our website, we also have a calendar that will not only have the monthly installations, but there's an opportunity for folks, faculty, staff, student orgs, to submit any events or initiatives that you're doing that help us continue this dialogue outside of our monthly initiatives that we'll be doing. So please make sure that you check that out and check out the upcoming monthly initiatives as well. We're really excited. This is just the beginning. And it's going to be a great initiative moving forward. So thank you so much for taking a look at that.
Thank you, Dr. Gilmore. And then you want to make sure too, and we'll make sure this information is present and available to you. The People's Dialogue website will be available. It's launched, but it's somewhat hidden because we wanted to make sure it's ready. We'll make sure it's available to you all. It has all the information there with the schedule. Here's the other thing we'll say. Again, if you, based on what you heard today, are a member of our faculty, if you're a student leader that has an interest in being a panelist, if you have resources that you think you would like to be featured here, if you have an outside speaker that you think will be valuable, let us know. We want to be in community with you. This is a partnership. We are a community. And so let us know. When it comes to the Community Belonging and Success website, again, this is how we want to create a foundation for how we create belongingness across our campus. So it's our website there. And again, as Tom mentioned, not only from the Institute to some of the resources to the book and the work they're doing, if you're interested in learning more about the work that they're doing, especially knowing some of the historical context around, Ida B. Wells and some of the work that she had done in a connection to Chicago, you can follow their website there. We will continue to put more resources on the site that allows you to take some of the work we're doing here in this space and continue to allow you to do it in your space. But we definitely want this to be the first of many things that we can do as a campus, but we do not want this to be a monopolized space. There's too many spaces that are happening that do this great work, and we want to be just to be a support of those spaces as well. All right, and last but not least, our next event is going to take place Wednesday, October 30th, and this will be in person, limited space in the ballroom. This will be like a town hall round table style. And the topic is what's on the ballot. And this is this idea, and Tom talked about it as well, this idea of political polarization in America. Thanks to our faculty support from the Cafe Group, we have already secured our faculty speaker. We are going to announce our external speaker and then also our moderator and panelists. We're going to express that later. Registration, as you can see, will open on the 16th. Spaces in person is limited, so when it becomes available, please register. There will be a streaming that will be hosted thanks to, again, our partnership with APSU-TV, so you will be able to watch that on APSU-TV's stream. But more to come. Thank you so much to everyone that has made this first kickoff possible. Thank you to Tom, and thank you to the Division of Student Affairs, to the President's Office, to all of our folks that have created this space. Those of you in the watch party, those of you that really are invested in this space to create a campus where we can express ourselves, our students that are passionate about ensuring that this campus feels a place where you are safe, where you can express and you can be and advocate and learn. We cannot do it without you. And I would say, as we continue this series, continue to bring ideas and thoughts and approaches to the table, because we are open to it. And this is just the beginning, as we mentioned. So without further ado, we thank you all for being a part of this first kickoff webinar session. And I guess I'll say go Govs, and see you at our next session. And we will follow up with an email with the recording and some helpful resources. And until next time, have a great rest of your week. Thank you all.